Hello there, I'm the Biblical Translator, and today's scripture is taken from Matthew 5:37. Let your yes be yes and your no, no. Now, are you one of those people who over-explain? Somebody says to you, oh, can I see you on Friday? And instead of saying, oh no, it's not convenient, you say, oh, I would have loved to have come, but last week my auntie came up and she said that she's going to come this Friday. And then because she said she's going to come this Friday, I've had to rearrange everything else. And I would have loved to have come, but this has happened and that. And you go on and on and on, trying to convince that person why you can't make it on Friday, when all you need to really say is it's not convenient. So let me tell you my story. In Matthew 5:37, Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no, no. Anything beyond this comes from evil. It is a short sentence, but it teaches us about integrity and the way people use extra words because they feel insecure. They believe others won't believe them if they say things simply and accurately. In everyday life, most people recognize the feelings of adding extra explanations to make themselves sound reasonable or safe or acceptable. It is the instinct to say yes, but, or no, because, and then keep talking until the other person looks satisfied. What Jesus talks about is not simply the mechanics of speech, but the condition of the heart that produces that kind of speech. At the time this was said, people often strengthened their statements by swearing oaths. They would say they swore by heaven or by the temple or by Jerusalem, believing that attaching something sacred to their words made them more convincing. Jesus steps into that culture and removes the scaffolding. He is not telling people never to explain themselves, nor is he forbidding careful communication. He is pointing out that if a person lives truthfully, their ordinary words should already carry weight. A plain yes should be reliable, and a sufficient no should be clear. The need for layers of verbal reinforcement usually signals that something underneath is unsettled. In modern terms, many people have learned to over-explain as a survival skill. Some grew up in environments where they were not believed the first time they spoke. Others learned that approval came only after thorough justification. Over time, explanation becomes more than communication, it becomes self-protection. A person starts to feel that their worth must be proven through detailed reasoning, careful disclaimers, and emotional reassurance. That simple answer begins to feel risky, as though it might be judged as careless, rude, or insufficient. What Matthew 5:37 offers is not harshness or bluntness, it is an invitation into inner stability. When Jesus says, let your yes be yes, he is describing a life where words come from alignment rather than anxiety. A person who knows their own integrity does not need to decorate their speech. Their agreement is sincere, their refusal is honest, and neither requires a performance. This does not remove kindness or empathy. It removes the fear that honesty must be padded in order to be acceptable. It removes the fear that honesty must be padded in order to be acceptable. There is also a relational dimension to this teaching. Clear speech reduces confusion and builds trust. When someone habitually over-explains, the listener can become unsure what the actual answer is. The core message becomes buried under reassurance, and both parties may leave the conversation uncertain. By contrast, a simple and truthful response creates stability. It allows relationships to function on mutual respect rather than constant negotiation. The instruction is not about speaking fewer words for their own sake. It is about making sure the words that are spoken come from a settled place rather than a defensive one. Emotionally, this teaching can feel freeing. It suggests that a person does not need to justify their basic choices in order to deserve understanding. A no can be given without apology when it is honest. A yes can stand without elaborate promises attached. The emphasis shifts from managing impressions to living consistently. When speech reflects genuine intent, the pressure to perform decreases. People begin to notice that their value does not rise or fall with how thoroughly they explain themselves. The phrase anything beyond this comes from evil can sound severe to modern ears, but the sense behind it is less about condemnation and more about caution. It is a warning that excessive verbal padding often grows from unhealthy soil, fear, manipulation, or the desire to control perception. Jesus is drawing attention to the root rather than scolding the behaviour. He is saying that speech is healthiest when it springs from truthfulness and self-respect, not from anxiety or the need to secure approval. Seen this way, Matthew 5:37 is practical guidance for daily living. It touches ordinary moments, agreeing to meet someone, declining an invitation, stating an opinion, setting a boundary. In each of these situations, the teaching invites a person to speak from clarity rather than compulsion. Over time, this kind of speech becomes a quiet form of integrity. It does not demand attention, but it earns trust. It does not rely on volume or length, but on consistency. For someone who has spent years feeling the need to justify themselves, this verse can feel like permission to rest. It does not remove thoughtfulness or consideration for others. Instead, it affirms that honesty delivered with calm respect is enough. The worth of a person does not depend on how persuasive their explanation sounds. Their dignity is already present, and their words can simply reflect it. In everyday life, this might look like pausing before answering and speaking or responding in a simple and truthful way. You may notice the urge to add extra reasons, but ask yourself in the moment, do I need to validate what I have to say? Is an additional explanation really necessary? It is not about becoming abrupt or indifferent. It is about trusting that clarity is not unkind. When speech becomes simpler, it often becomes warmer as well, because it is no longer carrying the strain of self-defense. So, Matthew 5:37 is less about grammar and more about grounding. It invites people to live in such a way that their words are supported by their character rather than by verbal reinforcement. A steady life produces steady speech. In that steadiness, communication becomes easier, relationships become clearer, and the quiet confidence of being truthful begins to replace the old habit of proving one's worth through explanation. The teaching remains practical because we can relate to how it connects us to our ordinary exchanges in daily life, and it offers a path towards peace within those exchanges. In conclusion, let your yes be yes and your no be no is not a command to be monosyllabic or emotionally shut down. In other words, it isn't telling people to reduce their vocabulary to one-word answers or to avoid conversation. The emphasis is not on how many words are used, but on the clarity and integrity behind the words. It is suggesting that being concise is closer to the spirit of teaching than being brief for its own sake. Concise speech is saying what is true and sufficient, no more than needed, no less than honest, without padding or defensive over-explaining. You can still offer context, kindness, or practical information, but you are not speaking from anxiety or trying to secure approval through excess detail. So that's taken. Matthew 5:37 appears within the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapters 5-7, where Jesus addresses everyday ethics such as anger, honesty, forgiveness, and treatment of others. The instruction about yes and no follows his discussion of oaths, emphasizing integrity in ordinary speech rather than reliance on sworn promises. And that's all I've got to say for now. Bye-bye.